everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you for participating this afternoon. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. We're pleased to have as our presenters today Ann Singleton, James Overbeek, and Dylan Cullifer, who will be assisting in the Q&A box. Ann Singleton is a Senior Safety and Security Analyst for the NTD program since 2009. Ann has been involved with several FCA initiatives such as the State Safety Oversight Program, the Commuter Rail Safety Study, and the Transit Bus Safety and Security Program in a variety of roles. Prior to Ann's work with FTA, she was a software instructor and database developer. James Overbeek joined the NTD team in 2015. He is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College and currently works as a validation analyst with the Safety and Security module of the National Transit Database. Dylan Cullifer is an NTD analyst for the NTD team. She is a graduate of William & Mary and has been assisting the Safety and Security module for the past year. For today's webinar, the presentation will be ongoing, and if you have a question at any time during the presentation, please call up the Q&A box and type your question in there. I believe Dylan is going to attempt to answer the questions, and James and Ann will trade off when they're not speaking. At the end of the session, if there are any outstanding questions, we'll moderate them out loud. There's also a chat box, but we do prefer that you put your question in the Q&A box because it's much easier to keep track of. If you don't have a copy of the presentation, which should have been emailed to you, as soon as we get started, I will be pasting a link for you to download that in the chat box. So call that up from your menu, which probably is on the bottom of your screen, depending on your settings. I think that's it for all of our housekeeping, and I will now turn the presentation over to Ann.
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. The goal of today's session is to familiarize NTD reporters with the safety and security reporting requirements and the individual reporting forms. For those of you that report for purchase transportation providers, PT operations, as you see in your system, please feel free to share this presentation with them or any other departments within your organization that provides data to you so that they too are aware of the requirements for reporting NTD data. So today we're going to show you how to access the NTD system and navigate through the various menus and forms. We'll discuss how setup is achieved and review the safety package navigation and features. Then we'll go through each of the reporting forms and the typical forms that are presented in a collision report. As Lori mentioned, your instructors today are James and I, with Dylan backing us up in the chat box, which we appreciate so much. Excuse me, our contact information is presented here. The NTD Program Manager and NT Operations Center Managers will not be joining us today, as far as I know. And we'll also have this contact information presented at the end of the presentation as well, in case you didn't get a chance to note it here. Okay, and with that, I'm going to let James start us off.
Thanks, Ann. First, we will have a brief overview of the NTD program. Then we will discuss the website and show you how to navigate the system. Here on this slide is just a brief history of the National Transit Database. Full reporters are required to report safety and security data on a calendar year schedule. This data is used to direct, support, or improve other FTA program initiatives, such as the State Safety Oversight Program. NTD data is also used to generate various analyses of trends in transit safety and security. When an agency submits a form, the safety analyst reviews and validates the report using a combination of various validation tools. In addition to these tools, S&S-20 forms are read by the analyst to compare the event description against data points. If we do have any questions or we request corrections, we'll return the form to the agency, but we may also call or email the reporters. The various forms and reports have their own deadlines. The S&S-20 monthly summaries are due on the last day of each month for the previous month's data. For example, the October report is due November 30th. The NTD system sends automated email reporting reminders to the safety contact on the 20th of each month. This is not a late notice, just a reminder to report. The NTD system sends automated late notices on the 1st and 5th of each month if your data has not been submitted. Please note that a report that has been saved but not submitted is considered late. When late notices are sent, it is quite common for analysts to receive calls from the reporters saying they know they completed their report. This may be true, but if there's no submit date, the system generates the late notice. On the 15th of each month, if data is still outstanding, a third late notice is sent by the analyst. FDA may initiate the delinquent reporter process and add the agency to FDA's failure to report list. If there are any extenuating circumstances why you cannot report, please advise your safety analyst. Failure to report required data can have severe consequences and could affect the agency's annual program funding. A failure to report can be submitted by an analyst to FDA for a variety of reasons, as you see listed here. Please remember to submit timely reports and respond to analyst inquiries. Here's a screenshot of the National Transit Database homepage on the Federal Transit Administration website. On the left are several links indicated by red arrows that we will discuss on the coming slides. The first of these links is the About the NTD section, which contains an overview of the NTD program, contact information, and help desk contact information. The NTD data section provides access to published data products such as the various time series products, historical and current annual data and profiles, monthly ridership statistics, and the national transit summaries and trends, just to name a few. Under reference materials, you will find the NTD glossary, policy manuals, quick reference guides, information on training and conferences, presentations and webinars, and an explanation of all the forms used in NTD reporting. Click on either NTD reporting tool or reporting login to log into the NTD program. Use your business email and all lowercase letters to log in. Users can change the password as often as they like, but the system requires a new password every 60 days. Passwords must be at least 12 to 20 characters comprised of at least one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and/or special character. If a user ID has not been used for 60 days, the system will lock that user ID. If you get locked out, you may try to gain access by clicking on the Reset Password link located beneath where you enter your login. If you gain access but do not see your usual access level, you can try to unlock requests from the Actions menu or contact the NTD Help Desk, your annual analyst, or your safety analyst for assistance. The agency's user manager establishes a person's user role in the system. The user manager is also the point of contact if you need to have your user role changed. A person must be uniquely identified in only one role. There are 6 access levels for NTD reporting. The CEO delegate, and NTD contacts have the highest level of access and full functionality to include the NTD annual forms, monthly ridership, and safety and security data. The main difference between the 2 CEO accesses and the NTD contacts is that the CEOs and the CEO delegates can submit the agency's certification forms. The NTD contact has overall responsibility for NTD reporting. NTD editors, shown only as editor in the system, can edit annual forms and can submit monthly ridership and safety and security forms. The safety contact can create, edit, delete, save, and submit S&S forms, and will also receive reporting reminders and late notices. The safety editor can create, edit, and save, but not submit safety data, and safety viewers can only view data. None of the safety contacts can change annual or monthly ridership data. After entering your login and password, the first screen that appears is shown here on the left. Once you click on Agree to the disclaimer, the boxes for you to enter your username and password are presented. You will also see either the Forgot Password or Reset Password or Forgot Password link accordingly. With the launch of the new Sites interface in September, the first screen will appear similar to this screenshot. However, you may have different options based on the sites you have access to. If you only have access to NTD, or that is the most common site you visit, you can bookmark this site by clicking on the star for faster access in the future. Once you complete the login, this is a snapshot of the default screen. You will notice there are menu options in the blue bar across the top. Below the menu options, you see the various modules within NTD. I'm sure you have also noticed you no longer have to click on records to see these modules. The task menu, which shows you how many tasks are in your queue. Tasks are the things that you need to do. For example, one of the tasks you may have is to manage any pending or incomplete S&S reports. The Reports tab will display reports that are available to you. First, click on the category, in this case, Safety. There are two reports you may find helpful here. One is the Historical Lookup Report to view safety and security data reported in prior years. Another report is the Rate Compared to Industry Rate Report, which computes and compares your agency's incident, injury, and fatality rates against the industry average for 10 million unlinked passenger trips. Under the Action menu item, there are no actions related to safety data reporting, but you may see actions depending on your user role. The grid provides internal access to other sites, such as FDA organizations, the user management module, the SSOR, for state safety oversight data, and so on. The silhouette is where you log out, and you can access your Appian profile and system settings. First, we will review safety and security setup navigation. Safety and security packages are automatically generated at the beginning of a new calendar year based on the agency's previous reporting status. Modes and types of service available in the safety module are determined by the agency's P20 form. Reporting starts at engineering and construction phase and is based on commitment date on the P20 form. If you see any unexpected changes to the modes or types of service, or have any questions about the modes or types of service you see, contact a person in your agency who submits the annual reporting data. If you do not know who that is, contact your validation analyst and we will look into it. Please do not attempt to modify the P20 profile, as changes made here can affect all aspects of reporting and may cause data to be deleted. The safety packages give you access to all safety and security reporting forms. Here is a list of all the safety forms. The S&S-20 CEO's Data Certification Form, the S&S-30 Security Configuration, the ability to create and view any S&S-40 major event reports, and the S&S-50 non-major summary report. As I mentioned, from the Home tab, click on Safety module to view available safety packages by year. Right now, we still have 3 years open, but 2018 will close shortly. If you click on Folder and Agency in blue, on the left, the next screen you see is the Summary View / landing page. If you want to bypass the landing page and go directly to the dashboard where you can add or edit forms, click on the pencil at the right side of the package. So this is equivalent to clicking on NTD Safety Forms on the landing page and therefore skips a step. You may also have noticed that the former working message you used to see when making a selection has been replaced with a status bar across the top of the screen. When you open the year's safety package by clicking on the folder I just mentioned, the Safety Summary View, also called the landing page, displays. You see a confirmation of the reporting year, your agency ID number and name, your validation analyst name and email address, and your agency's fiscal year information. You can filter the results to display in the table by using either or both the form name filter box and or the form status filter box. In the form table, you can sort by any of the columns to help in locating the form you wish, and double-click the column heading to reverse sort. You can also use the browser's find feature by doing Control F and enter the number of the major report you may be looking for. However, you must be on the right page to find it. Remember, you cannot open any of these forms on the Safety Summary view. To access the form, you must first click on the NTD Safety Forms button located in the upper right of the screen. When you click on the NTD Safety Forms button, the dashboard is displayed. It looks similar to the Safety Summary view, but you can open existing forms and create major event forms by clicking on the File New S&S-20 button. To open an existing form, click the blue form name and number link in the first column. This form table can be sorted and filtered just as we discussed on the previous Safety Summary view. That concludes the navigation. Now we'll move on to the S&S-20 Safety and Security CEO form. The S&S-20 CEO Certification form is the CEO's confirmation of the accuracy of the safety and security data for the previous calendar year. The form becomes available on January 15th in the previous year's safety package. The form automatically calculates data and from submitted reports for the year. Unsubmitted data is not included. The form is due by the end of February of the following, and only a person logged in as the CEO or CEO delegate can submit the form. Late notices are sent to the CEO. Data reporters should review their data to ensure it matches to the data in the S&S-20. Agencies should also use any in-house reports available to help verify the data. Also, the historical lookup report on the Reports tab may be useful as it shows incident counts by month. If the data does not match, check to ensure that all safety data reports are submitted. Unsubmitted data is not included. You may add or delete S&S-40s or edit S&S-50 data, and the S&S-20 will automatically recalculate the numbers. Remember to always notify your safety analyst if you delete any data. You or your CEO will check the confirm box adjacent to the data. Then the CEO can click on submit. Once the form is submitted, it cannot be resubmitted, but the form auto-calculates each time it is opened. Here's a snapshot of the S&S-20 CEO Certification form. Now we'll talk about the S&S-30. The S&S-30 Security Configuration Form collects the number and type of security personnel employed or contracted by your agency. The form is completed once at the beginning of the calendar year, and you are not required to update this form during the year. All S&S-30s must be completed and submitted to enable reporting. If you cannot create or edit an S&S-40 or 50, it is most likely because one or more S&S-30s is not submitted. Notice you have a place to enter the primary number of security personnel and the total number of security personnel, which is the primary and secondary added together. Do not leave either of these boxes blank. Below that is a list of 7 types for your security personnel with 2 columns to identify the primary or secondary. The primary security force is the one that routinely responds to events and or is assigned to patrol agency property. Please use a count of 0 for the use of local police non-contracted section. The secondary security force is the one or ones that occasionally respond or responds when the primary force requires assistance. Again, for the use of local police non-contracted, use a count of 0. The number of personnel is reported in full-time equivalent hours. So 1 full-time equivalent equals 1 person working a 40-hour week or 2,080 hours per year. You'll prorate the number of personnel if the person works only part-time providing transit security or they provide security for more than one mode. One S&S-30 is completed for each mode. Please be careful not to double count personnel. The number from the total number of security personnel box from each S&S-30 form should equal the total number of agency security personnel, and below is an example. If your security force covers multiple modes, you may use any reasonable method for determining FTEs. That may be modal ridership or the number of employees covering a mode. If an agency contracts for security and pays a monthly fee based on services used, they should determine FTE based on the previous year's total hours worked. NTD allows for only one primary personnel type. If your agency has more than one type of security personnel it considers its primary, report the security force with the largest number of personnel as the primary and the smaller force as secondary. For further information on the S&S-20, please see the S&S policy manual on the NTD website or ask your analyst for assistance. We will now look at non-major reporting. The definition of a reportable event is a safety or security event occurring on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle. These safety events must meet the single injury only threshold and are related to falls, electric shock, smoke, etc. If the safety event results in multiple injuries, the event is bumped up to a major report. The S&S-20 form also collects the number of non-major fires where there was no evacuation, injuries, fatalities, or property damage, but that still requires suppression. There are some exclusions to the non-major events, which are events occurring at bus stops or shelters that are not on transit-owned property, unless it involves a person boarding or lighting, and OSHA events occurring in administrative buildings. The form is automatically generated for each mode and type of service at the beginning of each month. The form is required to be completed even if there was a major event for the month, as they capture different event types, and even if there is no data to report for the month. To recap, for submitting other safety events, you are entering the number of incidents and the matching number of injured parties. Remember that injured means that they were transported away from the scene for medical attention, regardless of whether they appear injured or not. Do not include people who were not transported away from the scene for medical attention, or those transported only for intoxication where there is no injury. Here are several examples of injuries reported on the S&S-20. Here's a snapshot of the S&S-20 monthly summary report form. Two of the categories for injuries on the S&S-20 form relate to securement issues. Securement issues are those related to an injury resulting from improper securement of a mobility device such as a wheelchair or scooter, so they are reported as other in-vehicle securement issues. The other category is other in-vehicle, not a securement issue. These are trips, slips while on the vehicle for being thrown from a seat during a vehicle maneuver. Undocumented attempted suicides where the person does not truly make an attempt and the person is transported for mental health is reported on the S&S-20. For example, a person in a transit center may tell an official they want to harm themselves, yet do not attempt to do so and is transported for evaluation. If no qualifying safety events occurred for the month and mode, open the appropriate S&S-20 form and choose the checkbox adjacent to No Data to Report. Then save and submit the report. Remember, do not include injuries due to any collisions or security events on the S&S-20. Again, reports are due at the end of the following month and must be completed and submitted by the due date to avoid an automatic late notice. The S&S-20 and S&S-20 forms can be modified at any time. Some reporters like to enter events as they occur during the month. For these reporters, they can modify the form and save and close the form after each change. Your validation analyst reviews each report for accuracy. If we have any questions, we may return the report to you, call, or email you with our concern. If the return feature is used, the user login listed under the last modified user column will receive the email. And now I'll turn it over to Ann.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I apologize. So yes, now we're going to go over creating major event forms, the S&S-20s. So first we're going to start off with the applicability and the thresholds. Applicability is the same as it is for the S&S-50s, but we're going to be going into in more detail. Reportable safety event or is a reportable safety or security event on the transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a transit revenue maintenance facility or rail yard, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle that meets a reporting threshold. Excuse me. There are a few exclusions. Events that occur off transit property where persons, vehicles, or objects come to rest on transit property after the event are not included. OSHA events and admin buildings, death from illness or natural causes, maintenance vehicle or other non-revenue vehicle collisions that occur while driving to or from an activity are not reportable, including collisions involving a supervisor or a transit police car vehicle while operating on the public streets. Fatality is one of our thresholds confirmed within 30 days of the date of the event. Each of these thresholds, by the way, is individual. We don't combine them together to form an event. If the event meets any one of these thresholds, it's reportable. The fatality does include suicides. One or more persons being transported away from the scene for medical attention or a serious injury, substantial property damage, evacuations of a transit facility or a vehicle for life safety reasons or to the rail right-of-way, and derailments, both main line and in the yard. Continuing, a collision involving a rail transit vehicle at a grade crossing is automatically reportable. Excuse me. A collision between a rail transit vehicle and a person is automatically reportable. Collision between a transit rail vehicle and another transit rail vehicle, which includes both revenue or non-revenue and maintenance vehicles, and any event involving a runaway train. Example of some reportable events, excuse me. First of all, part of the event definition that we just discussed mentions involving transit revenue vehicle. So if a deadheading or out-of-service vehicle is involved in a collision and it meets a reporting requirement, it is reportable. Maintenance-related activities are included. Here you see a few examples of maintenance-related activities that would be reportable. Please remember that less severe injuries to maintenance workers are captured on the S&S-50 monthly summary report along with those non-major fires. Here's a few examples of some events that are not reportable to NTD. First two listed are examples of events that occur off transit property. Also, medically related issues such as seizures, heart attacks, or other illnesses are not reportable. And again, employees injured on a city street or other property that's not owned on transit-owned property. An example of this would be an operator on a break or something, excuse me, and they're injured while on their break. NTD also collects non-transit collisions, such as an accident in a transit parking lot or with transit property. And here you see a few examples of those. In addition, this would include non-revenue maintenance equipment, not vehicles, equipment that collides with anything or anyone except for a train. Okay, so now we're going to go into each one, a little bit more specifics about each one of the thresholds. First, again, fatalities, and again, it's confirmed within 30 days of the date of the event. So if you report something as an injury, you find out it's a fatality, you can certainly change that in your report. Again, you don't want to include deaths from illnesses or natural causes, and you also do not want to include people that are just found deceased on your property. There are two types of injuries. An injured person who is transported away from the scene for immediate medical attention is considered a non-serious injury. This includes transport by ambulance or private vehicles by any means. And an injury may be deemed serious, which does not require transport away from the scene. So again, serious injuries do not have to be transported away from the scene. Whenever you report a serious injury, please describe the nature of the injury in your event description box. We do request confirmation of that of that serious injury. It makes us easier to validate our reports and ensure that we're collecting data in a consistent way. Please note also, in case you report for non-rail modes as well, that the threshold differences are different between non-rail modes like your bus modes and your rail modes. Okay, so here is the definition of your serious injuries versus your non-serious. So as we just mentioned, non-serious injuries, basically you have to have attention away from the scene immediately after the event. Whereas serious injuries gives you more specific criteria regarding the nature of the injury. We understand that this may sometimes be difficult to get, especially about hospital stays with HIPAA laws in place, but we just expect agencies to gather what they can gather as well as they can gather it. They only expect FDA only expects a reasonable effort in attaining the information. Okay, substantial damage was one of the thresholds that we had. And as you can see, we've kind of separated this into two paragraphs to make it quite clear. The first part of this is that there has to be damage to any of your vehicles, facilities, your rolling stock, your equipment, your infrastructure, or so forth, that disrupts the operations of your rail system. So that's the first part. Has to disrupt operations. The second part is that it has to adversely affect the strength, performance, operating characteristics of the item, the object, the vehicle, whatever it is, which if it's a vehicle could requiring towing, you could have to send a rescue train, may require on-site maintenance, or it may require immediate removal of that vehicle prior to safe operation. Substantial damage excludes, as you can see here, damage to cracked windows, small puncture holes in the body, broken lights, broken mirrors, removal for service for the minor repairs, testing, so on and so forth. It also excludes property damage such as cell phones, laptops, medical claims, litigation, so on. Now, just a moment ago, we talked a little bit about on-site maintenance. So we mentioned on-site maintenance and removal from service. So at first glance, it looks like that's both included and excluded. Most agencies have policies to remove vehicles from service for post-accident investigations or evaluations. When you're applying a substantial damage threshold, consider both parts to the substantial damage criteria that we just reviewed. That includes the damage to vehicles and objects and on-site maintenance or removal prior to safe operation. The exclusions from service for minor repairs and maintenance does not refer to damage in this context. Removal for service due to post-accident inspections may be a policy, but it does not necessarily due to damage. Continuing with the example of exclusions from service for minor repairs, in non-transit collision where a vehicle hits a catenary pole disrupting service, the repairs could be minor but still disrupt service significantly. Agencies should report substantial damage if the passenger vehicle or overhead catenary system is substantially damaged as a result of the event. Regarding the towing aspect of the substantial damage threshold, this does not pertain to towing of the train. This refers to the towing of another vehicle that may be involved in this collision, and the vehicle was towed due to disabling damage in order to meet the threshold. Again, you do not want to include tow away as part of your substantial damage if that vehicle was towed because the operator is taken to the hospital or the operator of that vehicle requests that it be towed, but it has to have some sort of damage that prohibits it from being driven, even if that damage is a flat tire. Okay, rail transit vehicle collisions at a grade crossing are automatically reportable. This includes pedestrian crosswalks in your stations. The collision could be with an auto, an object, an animal, or so on. A grade crossing is where rail tracks and a road or a pedestrian pathway intersect. For systems running in mixed traffic, such as all streetcar and many light rail systems, each street intersection is considered a grade crossing. A collision between a rail transit vehicle and a person is also automatically reportable, regardless of any injury or fatality. For example, if a pedestrian walks into the side of a moving train and is not injured, you report the collision with a person, but you do not include the injury form. As a reminder, if a person bumps into a train that is not moving at the time, that's considered a slip, trip, and fall, and it's reported on the S&S-20 non-major form. Rail-to-rail vehicle collisions are also automatically reportable as a rail collision, including any configuration of 2 or more revenue or non-revenue vehicles. However, if a non-revenue vehicle collides with a person or an object, including equipment, it's still reportable as a rail collision, but the collision must meet a different threshold, a separate threshold. I think I skipped a screen there. Maybe not. Okay. All right. So when you're reporting rail-to-rail collisions, we thought this table would be helpful to determine how to report the collision and how many number of vehicles to include. So when you create a rail collision report, the collision event form requires you to enter how many trains are involved and how many other vehicles are involved. So you see that in a revenue train to revenue train collision, you would include 2 trains involved. For a revenue train collision to a high rail vehicle or other maintenance vehicle collision, you would include 1 train and 1 other vehicle. If the collision is between 2 maintenance vehicles, such as 2 high rail vehicles, then you would only include other vehicles and do not include any trains. In the last row, you see that when a work train or maintenance vehicle collides with a person or an object, or it collides with rail equipment, such as a flat car that is not attached to a vehicle, that the event is still reported as a rail collision, but a threshold has to be met. So it has to meet the injury, property damage threshold. Those would be the most common in order to be reportable. Also, agencies are required to report derailments of both on both the main line and those that are occurring in the yard, regardless of meeting any other threshold. This includes derailments of trains in or in non-revenue service, and also includes rail maintenance vehicles. And then the runaway train threshold does apply only to revenue trains in or out of service, but does not include work trains. This includes manned or unmanned trains, and a runaway train could be reported under as a collision, as a derailment, or an other safety event. So it would have to fit into one of those categories. And then finally, the last threshold is evacuations. So all evacuations for life safety reasons or evacuations to the rail right-of-way are reportable. This includes directed or self-directed customer self-evacuations. An evacuation for life safety means that there's imminent danger to all of the people in that environment or in the vehicle. Self-evacuations are where customers vacate the property without the direction of the transit agency or other authority. Just a quick note, so the evacuation has to be for life safety or to the rail right-of-way. If it's a self-evacuation, that's not a threshold, but it's just a notation on the evacuation form. Some examples of life safety reasons might be a suspicious package, bomb threats, bombings, a smoke event, fire, fuel fumes, and so on. An evacuation may be due to a mechanical or maintenance issues. For example, a train loses power and the passengers are evacuated onto the right-of-way. However, if the passengers are moved from a train to, say, a rescue train without stepping onto the right-of-way, so they literally go from train door onto the other train door, or they're evacuated to the station platform, then that's not considered an evacuation to the right-of-way. Okay, so now that we've gone through all of the thresholds, we're going to take a look at how you actually create an S&S-20 and go through the collision forms. So as James mentioned earlier, on your summary view, you would click on the File New S&S-20 button. If you have an event that includes 2 or more transit modes from your agency, how would you choose which agency to report under? So we go by the predominant use rule. So if your rail mode, one of your streetcars and one of your buses collide with each other, then you're going to report that under rail. Okay, when you start the S&S-20 forms, excuse me, the first 2 screens are going to act like a wizard to help you determine if the event is reportable. So the screen 1 captures the date of the event, the mode and type of service, and the event type. And this is what that screen looks like. So the options, aside from the date and the mode or type of service, the options for your various event types are a collision. That's the first one since it's the most common. This includes suicides or attempted suicides where there's vehicle impact. However, if a person is intentionally pushed in front of a train and is struck, then that would be reported as an assault. And we'll see that in a moment, assaults. Derailments are the next choice, again, both mainline and yard. If the derailment results in a collision, however, you're going to report that event as a collision. You report what happens first. It was the collision that resulted in a derailment, so it gets reported as a collision. For an event to be considered a fire, there must be flame suppression. Non-fire smoke events or the smell of something burning, which meets a threshold, are reported under other safety events. For an event to be considered a hazmat situation, it would not only have to meet a threshold, but the situation would have to have required a specialized cleanup crew, such as a hazmat team, to come in and clean up the mess. Acts of God refer to acts of nature, tornadoes, snowstorms, ice storms, so on. Security events have 2 types. We have system security events, such as arson, bomb threats, bombings, suspicious packages, and so on. Basically, these are those that affect the transit system itself. And then there's personal security events such as assault, robbery, homicide, attempted suicide, so on and so forth, that affect 1 or more persons. Again, just as with your other events, you have to have a reporting threshold met in order to report the event. Suicides and attempted suicides that are not as a result of impact with a vehicle, not as a result of a collision, are reported on this section under personal security. And then the last option is the other safety events. These are the events that don't fit into any of the other categories, but they meet a reporting threshold. This might be an evacuation due to smoke or a fall in a transit station resulting in a fatality. Notice a little asterisk next to the injuries of 2 or more people or serious injury. Remember, if there's 2 or more non-serious injuries, that does get bumped up from the non-major, as James mentioned, to a major event. If there's only 1 injury on that, then on that other safety event, in order to be a major event, there would have to be another threshold. So maybe there are people falling down the stairs, 1 was deceased, 1 was injured. Then you would report that as a major event. All right, so setup screen 2 asks you to complete the number of injuries that are incurred in this event, and also if there's the number of fatalities would be included. It asks if the event incurred substantial damage, and if you select yes there, it's going to present you with 3 options, basically to the transit property, to the non-transit property only, or to both. And then it asks you the evacuation question, evacuation for life safety or an evacuation to the rail right-of-way. So if it doesn't meet a reporting threshold when you've completed these 2 screens, a little message will pop up and tell you that it's not reportable as a major event. So you have the option to change something. Maybe you clicked on no when you meant to click on yes, or forgot to put in the number of injured, whatever the case may be. You can modify that second screen and then perhaps continue on, or it may not be reportable. Okay, so if the event type is reporting a collision, then you're going to be asked to complete, you're going to be asked 4 other questions. First, it's going to ask if transit revenue vehicles or non-revenue rail transit vehicles were involved in the event. It's going to ask you if it was at a grade crossing. It's going to ask you if it was a collision with another rail vehicle or with a person, or if there was a runaway train involved. Again, these are part of your reporting thresholds. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the collision screen 2 if you were reporting a collision. It has these additional 4 questions down here, as I said. All right. The question regarding were transit revenue vehicles or non-revenue rail transit vehicles involved in the event. Remember, you may remember earlier I mentioned that non-transit collisions are reportable, such as a vehicle hitting a catenary pole or whatever the case may be. Here's a couple of examples of non-transit collisions. And the way that a non-transit collision is generated is by answering no to this question, were transit revenue vehicles involved? This is a screenshot of the non-transit collision form. As you can see, it's much smaller. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, based on the selections that you've made, the event is either going to generate the basic information screen, or it's going to tell you it's not reportable. Okay, so assuming it is reportable, the next screen you see is the basic information screen. The basic information screen displays the date that you already selected back on screen 1, and it requests the time. And when you're entering the time, be sure to use your AM and PM designations, even if you're using the 24-hour or military clock format. I know it sounds odd, but if you put in 1300, you still have to put in 1300 PM. We're working to change that, but that's the way it functions right now. You will also enter in the approximate or actual location of the event. Additionally, you'll add in the geographic information such as longitude and latitude. You are permitted to enter only numbers, a decimal point, and then a negative symbol for your longitude. No commas, anything like that. Please use a minimum of 4 decimal places. If you don't have the coordinates, there are a variety of internet resources that you can use to determine lat and long. One such site that we use is called latlong.net. We find it very easy to use and often use it for confirming latitudes and longitudes that are presented in reports. So all you have to do, as you can see here, is put in a place name or a mile marker, whatever the case may be, an address, and then click on Find, and it pops in the longitude and latitude, and then you can just copy them from those boxes right into your report. All right, the event description. The basic information screen has the event description on it. The description can hold 2,000 characters. If you exceed the 2,000 character limit, and you try and go on to the next screen, it will tell you that you exceeded the limit, but not by how much. So you just have to start editing at that point until it fits within the requirements. The description is the most important thing to us. And this is an example actually this is from an actual report, of a description that tells us everything that we need to know when validating your report. So you always want to include what was happening, where it was happening, if a vehicle was towed, who was injured, how many of them were injured, so on. If event descriptions are incomplete or it just says the train hit a car, we're going to send it back and ask you to give us a more descriptive description. Okay. The event descriptions should not include, however, personally identifiable information. So we do not want you to put in operators' names, license plate numbers, badge numbers of police officers, driver's license numbers, anything that you can uniquely identify a person. Again, if it's there, we'll ask you to remove it. Event checkboxes for attempted suicide and suicide are also present on the basic information form. So you want to make sure that this is corroborated by what you choose on your injury or fatality form. And then the last piece of information on this form is the number, name, and phone number of someone to contact for additional information regarding the event. You do not need to enter the name of the person if they are already the safety contact. Traditionally, we're going to go back to the person that reported the event if we have any questions about it. So again, you don't want to put police officers' names and things like that here because more than likely we're not going to reach out to them. Basic information also has a progress bar across the top of the screen, as you'll see when we look at the next screen. All right, so there you can see the progress bar across the top, and this is what the basic information screen looks like. If you do enter that basic information contact down there and you're putting in the phone number, should have mentioned this earlier, don't use anything but the numbers. If you type in dashes and periods and parentheses and things like that as part of the phone number, it just truncates the phone number and we can't see what it is anyway. So just the digits there. All right, so now we're going to start going through the various collision screens. Typically, there will be 4 screens involved in the average collision. So it's the collision event information screen, the collision information screen, the transit vehicle involved screens, and then finally, if another vehicle is involved in that, then there will also be other vehicle forms. So this is what the collision event screen looks like, and we're going to go through each of the selections now. So on the collision event screen, this captures the information about the number of transit vehicles that are involved. This answer would always be 1 unless 2 transit vehicles from your agency collided. The location of the event, such as the transit facility or the right-of-way, the grade crossing, whatever the case may be. Right-of-way, not a grade crossing, would be the proper selection if that event happened at a driveway or a parking lot entrance. Those are not, or a mid-block event, those are not considered grade crossings. If you report an event that occurred in a non-revenue facility such as a yard, we still prefer that you indicate that the event occurred at a grade crossing or not, if possible. The collision width is the next question. If you're colliding with a bicyclist or a person in a wheelchair or a person on one of the lift items, things like that, then you're going to choose a collision with a person. Scooters, mopeds, motorcycles, school buses, dump trucks, things like this are all reported as a collision with a non-transit motor vehicle. A collision with a transit vehicle is used when 2 transit vehicles from your agency collide, and you choose the appropriate collision width depending upon if it was a train was in or not in service. In multiple impact collision scenario, the collision width is the first thing or vehicle, whatever, that you collided with. For example, if a train collides with a car and then the car goes on and hits a building, then the collision width would be non-transit motor vehicle. And then you would include the damages, from the building may have incurred, and include that fact that the building was involved in your event description. Now we're going to look here at a couple of examples for how many other motor vehicles to include in your collision with other vehicles. So as you can see here, if car 1 cuts off the LRV, but no contact is made, and then the LRV goes on to hit another car, car 2, then the number of vehicles to report would be 1, because only that second car had contact. If car 1 hits car 2 and then proceeds to hit the LRV, then the number of other vehicles to report would be 2, since both car 1 and car 2 had contact in the event. Please note that this number of other vehicles is not the total number of vehicles. We sometimes see that where they include the transit vehicle and the number of other vehicles there, but that's not what you want to do. You've already indicated how many transit vehicles are involved, so this is just the box for the number of other vehicles to include. All right, so this is the next screen after the collision event information screen. This is the collision information screen. We're going to go through these options now. Okay, so the collision information screen captures the information about the conditions at the time of the collision. All modes capture the weather and at the time of the collision, whether it was clear, raining, etc. It also has a selection there for tunnel, which is nice because then you don't have to worry about what the weather conditions are. You can just say it was in a tunnel. Under the lighting, you'll notice that there is an option for twilight. This is used to refer to both dawn and dusk when it's not full light out or full dark out yet. Please be sure that your lighting selection corroborates the time that you entered back on the basic information screen. Again, if the collision occurred in a tunnel or an indoor facility, then you would select the indoors option. This indoor option is not used to indicate street lights or lights on a platform. The rail alignment. We want to look at a couple here that sometimes cause confusion for reporters. The first one is shared with other rail vehicles, controlled access to other non-rail vehicles. So you would use this selection when the rail alignment is a semi-exclusive right-of-way with controlled grade crossings for vehicular or pedestrian traffic. The second one is non-exclusive right-of-way shared with other vehicles or pedestrians. This would be the appropriate selection when the right-of-way consists of rail tracks that are embedded in the street, streetcars, for example, and cars and people can just walk over them and drive over them in the same area that the transit vehicle travels. Neither of these options would be selected for a heavy rail mode, since heavy rail alignments would always be exclusive, with the exception of 2 agencies that we have that do have grade crossings, and you know who you are. For the grade crossing control device selection, be sure that the selection is consistent with the location that you've chosen, back on the 4th screen. Be sure to choose not applicable if the collision did not occur at a grade crossing. All right, then after the collision information screen, the next screen to appear is the transit vehicle involved screen. One screen will appear for each train involved in the collision. The form does include an identifier count, which is very helpful. You'll see train 1, train 2, so on, in your report. And there are buttons on these forms for adding or deleting a form. So if you've made an error, didn't include enough, added too many, you can very easily delete them at this point on your screen, or even when you're in the review process at the end of entering your event. This is a screenshot of the rail transit train involved screen. We're going to go through in detail. Okay, so the train involved screen captures the fleet information, the vehicle action, the collision type, the speed at the time of the collision, if there was a tow-away of the other vehicle, or if a runaway train was involved. The first option on the train involved form is this new, and you guys all saw it launch this year. I think it was around June. Anyway, and the new fleet selection, rather than you filling in the manufacturer and the fuel type and the vehicle type, all these parts, this new fleet involved section links to your agency's A30 revenue fleet file that's already reported in the system. There's an A30 for each mode and type of service that you report for. So with this integration, you're going to choose a vehicle from a list of available options coming from your A30. When you make the selection, the vehicle manufacturer, the fuel type are already part of it, and so you don't need to identify those, which really cuts down on making incorrect selections. If you're operating a new manufacturer that is not in your A30, you will have an option to enter a new fleet into the form. However, this is adding it to the form and not to your A30. So if it needs to be amended in your A30, you'd want to contact the person in your agency that does the annual reporting. All right, so this is what this subsection of that form looks like. So when you click on the existing fleet button, with the darker highlight around it as you see there, it comes up and it shows you the RVI ID. This is just a unique identifier that is assigned to that line item by the system. The agency fleet ID, which, oops, excuse me, I clicked, which is the field that the agencies fill out themselves. Now, in this case, you can see that that agency did not fill out that information. It may be helpful to you. Every agency is a little bit different. It also includes the total number of vehicles, the active fleet, so on, as you see here. So to select, you select the vehicle fleet by clicking on the checkbox that the red arrow here is pointing to. And then once you've clicked on that selection to choose that particular vehicle, you go down to the bottom, the other red arrow, and you click on the Add Fleet button. Okay. If the vehicle is not in your list, I'm just trying to make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. Okay. All right, so if it's not in the list, you can choose the New Fleet button. And when you choose the New Fleet button, it will give you these 3 boxes that you see here, just like you used to do back in 2019. You choose the vehicle type, you choose the manufacturer, and you choose the fuel type. And then, just like you did before, you would click on the Add Fleet button, and it puts it into the form. Now, if you've made a mistake and you chose the wrong one, to get rid of that vehicle that you've selected, you use the red X at the right-hand side. That's going to take it out of the form, and then you'll rewrite back to using either the existing fleet or the New Fleet button. Okay. The form also captures the number of cars that are in the train and the number of cars derailed, if applicable. The vehicle action at the time of the collision, was it stopped, was it turning, etc. And the collision type. This is the part of the train that was hit and is reported from the viewpoint of the train. This diagram shows you the impact points and are reported again from the view of the transit vehicle. A little bit more about some of these options. Other front impact is used when the front of the transit vehicle is impacted, but not when it would be considered a head-on or a head-on collision or a rear ending, where it has hit the back of another vehicle. An example would be if the front corner bumper hits another vehicle or an object while it's turning. This would not be the part of the bumper that's on the side, but the part of the bumper that would be on the front. Likewise, other rear impact is used when the transit vehicle is impacted on the rear end, but not when it would be considered rear-ended. For example, if the transit vehicle was backing up and it hit a utility pole or something, then that's when you would use other rear impact. Anytime that you use rear-ended or rear-ending, they have to be reported as a pair. So if you say the train was rear-ended, then the other vehicle did the rear-ending. Okay, multi-vehicle accidents or chain reaction accidents can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. It's always important to remember the first impact. That's how we validate these. So in the diagram here, vehicle 1 would be reported as rear end ding because it's doing the hitting there, which means that vehicle 2 was rear end dead, which then pushed vehicle 2 into the back of the train. I know that kind of looks like a bus there, but let's pretend it's a train. And so the vehicle 3, the transit vehicle, would be also reported as rear end dead. Okay, the form also collects the speed at the time of the collision. This is required, so even if the train is not moving and you've chosen stopped, you have to put in a 0 there. And then the last question on the form is, was a runaway train involved? And if so, you would click on yes. And then when you click on yes, it's going to ask you if the operator was in or not inside the vehicle at the time. All right. Then if another vehicle is involved in your collision, the other vehicle form will appear, and one form will appear for each number of other vehicles that you indicated back when it asked you that question. Again, this form has an identifier count on it, which is very handy to identify vehicle 1, vehicle 2. And like your transit forms, it has selections for adding and deleting vehicles, additional vehicles, so you can delete them if you added too many or add some in if you did not include enough. So as you can see here, this is an example of your other vehicle, motor vehicle screen with the options we just mentioned, and we're going to go over the other options in more detail. Okay, so the first thing that you're asked on the other vehicle form is the type of vehicle, and it includes a selection for hitting another commercial rail vehicle or Amtrak type vehicle. The automobile option would be used for both cars or passenger vans like a Dodge Caravan or something like that. And it also collects the physical action or movement of the other vehicle at the time of the collision. Just like when you're doing the transit vehicle, you also indicate the part of the vehicle that was hit from the viewpoint of the other vehicle. It also asks you the question on the other vehicle form about the towing. So here it's confirming the tow away. If you've selected substantial damage, for example, for towing, then you would want to make sure you check this button on the other vehicle form to corroborate that. All right, so that's all of the collision forms. If there is an injury or a fatality included in your event, then you're going to have an injury or fatality form, one for each number of injuries or fatalities that you've included. These forms also have buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of persons. The person type locations, there are 2 categories there of people inside vehicles and people outside of vehicles. So often we will see people accidentally choose that transit vehicle operator from the outside because that's the first section you see. But just be careful with that. There's an operator selection for inside and outside because obviously operators can get struck or their vehicles can roll away, so on and so forth. So just pay attention to the 2 categories when you're selecting that. Transit vehicle rider is an appropriate option if you're reporting passengers that are boarding or alighting your vehicle at the time, but it's also appropriate for the train surfers or those riding between your cars. Even though they're not in a legal portion of the train, they're still considered on the train. Pedestrian walking along road is also used to collect people walking along the tracks. Pedestrian other is the best choice for people sitting that are, that you just find they were sitting on the tracks, they were laying on the tracks, they were standing on the tracks. So that's pedestrian other, not the other option, but pedestrian other. The injury form includes selections for the type of injury as far as whether it's serious or non-serious. So you'll choose the appropriate box there. Remember that a seriously injured person may not have been transported from the scene, even though it sounds counterintuitive there. But again, if you choose a serious injury, we really appreciate it if you include in your description that something that corroborates the serious nature of the injury. The person broke their leg, for example. So that would be all the information we would need in that case. The forms also include boxes for attempted suicide on your injury form and trespasser, and suicide on your fatality form and trespasser checkboxes. You can check both of them, neither of them, just one of them, whatever is applicable. But again, just be sure that they corroborate your information and that these suicide and attempted suicide boxes corroborate what you've chosen back up on your basic information screen. If you've chosen pedestrian other that we just talked about right here at the top of the slide, that means somebody's standing on the tracks, they're laying on the tracks, whatever they're doing, you're going to select the trespasser checkbox. Okay. A little bit more information about trespassers. Just as we mentioned, I believe, with the attempted suicides, if there are police reports or eyewitness statements, etc., to account for the trespassing, that's very helpful for us to have in the event description, because again, anything that corroborates the data points you're checking helps us out in the validation. So it'd be very helpful to use the word trespassing or trespasser in your description. Trespassing events are not reported on the event level. There's no trespassing option as an event type, so it's not a threshold. We just collect this as a notation as part of the injury or the fatality. If a person jumps onto the tracks, perhaps in front of the vehicle, or they go under the platform or on an exclusive right-of-way, they're trespassing. However, if a person falls or is pushed onto the tracks, or the person is crossing the tracks in a non-exclusive right-of-way, then they're not considered trespassing. These examples only pertain to rail alignments, but trespasser could also be in an unauthorized area of the station, such as an employee-designated area. All right, so this is your fatality form, and then your injury form. And this is where we're pointing, the two red arrows are pointing out the transit operator. Well, I see my one top box red arrow there is a little bit off center, but you can see there, if you can see where I'm pointing to, that there is a transit vehicle operator under outside vehicles, and there's a transit vehicle operator under inside vehicles. Just asking you to choose carefully because we don't want to send a report back to you. Okay. All right. And with that, I'm going to let James take over for the last part.
Thanks, Ann. Earlier, we discussed evacuations. Evacuations can be included in any event type, but are less common in collisions. If an evacuation is incorrectly included or excluded, you cannot add or delete it from a report. The entire report would need to be deleted, and a new report entered with or without the evacuation. This is a screenshot of the evacuation subform. The first question on the evacuation event screen is to confirm that the evacuation was for life safety to the rail right-of-way, and if either of these situations was a self-evacuation. You may select as many options as needed. Include a brief description of the evacuation, including the cause. The what was evacuated question is used to indicate what was exactly evacuated. One choice would be vehicle vessel, which would mean the train. Do not report the location of the train at the time. Once the evacuation subform is generated in a report, it cannot be deleted. So if an evacuation is incorrectly included, the entire report would need to be deleted and a new report entered without the evacuation. Similarly, you cannot add an evacuation subform to a report. Reporting derailments. Of course, this is for rail modes only, not including Commuter Rail or Alaska Railway, since they report only security events. All derailments of transit trains on mainline track or in the yard are reported, even if the train is not in revenue service and regardless of any other major threshold. On the derailment form, you'll be asked to indicate if this is mainline or a yard derailment. Maintenance equipment such as a high rail vehicle's derailment are also automatically reportable. Please be sure to select one rail transit vehicle involved, even though this generates the train form, and not the other vehicle form. Reminder, derailments resulting from a collision are reported as collisions, not a derailment. Here's a screenshot of the derailment form. As you can see, the form collects the type of derailment, where the derailment occurred, and the number of trains involved. It also includes the location of the derailment and the right-of-way configuration. Here's a screenshot of the rail transit details form, which is much like the collision information screen, collecting lighting/alignment and conditions. Here's a screenshot of the derailment rail transit train involved form. Notice the same integration of the A30 form, which is completed just as we discussed under the collision section. The form also collects information about the train involved, including if the derailment was due to a runaway train. Reporting fires on the S&S-20 that meet one or more major event threshold. To be defined as a fire, the incident must have had fire suppression equipment or personnel involved to contain the fire and must meet a major event threshold. Without these thresholds, a fire requiring suppression is reported on the S&S-20 non-major summary report. Arson is reported on screen 1 as a system security event and not a fire. The presence of smoke only is reported as an other safety event. Here's a screenshot of the fire event details screen. You'll see you need to report the location, the fire type, and the transit vehicle fuel type, if it's applicable. There's a fire in or on the rail vehicle, including in the engine, wheel area, or anywhere on the outside. This would be reported as in or on vehicle. Report the type or cause of the fire. For the fuel type selection, if you chose the location of the fire as in or on vehicle, then you would report the fuel type of the vehicle. Acts of God are natural and unavoidable catastrophes that affect the transit environment. Select all locations of property damage, injuries, fatalities, and evacuations. You will be able to choose more than one option. For example, the location should indicate the property or properties that were damaged and not the geographic location, such as the name of the city. Here's a screenshot of the Act of God screen. As you'll see, you'll include the type, the location, when reporting hazardous material spills, the spill must meet a reportable threshold and have caused imminent danger to life, health, or environment, and requires specialized cleanup. A couple of examples of what is not reportable as a hazmat event are oil, brake fluid, etc. from a transit vehicle. It's most likely not enough fluid to meet a threshold. A bleach container carried onto a vehicle breaks open and the vehicle is evacuated due to fumes. This is reported as an other safety event because no specialized cleanup was used. Here's a screenshot of the hazardous material spill screen. Notice you report the location of the spill and the type of material spilled. There are two categories of security events on screen 1, system security or personal security events, which meet one or more of the following thresholds. System security events occur on transit property and affect the transit system as a whole. Personal security events happen to individuals on transit property or those boarding or lighting a transit vehicle. This is the form used to report attempted suicides or suicides where the event does not involve contact with the train. Here's a screenshot of the system security event screen. You may notice that there is an other system security event option on this form. This would be to capture security events that do not meet any other category. For example, shots fired at or objects thrown at a vehicle. Here's a screenshot of the personal security event screen. You will notice that there is an other personal security event option for events that do not fit into other categories. This would be such as when a person is transported to being tased by police. The final major event type is other safety events. This is your miscellaneous category. These events must meet one of the following thresholds: 1 or more fatalities, 2 or more injured, either serious or non-serious, substantial damage, an evacuation, or involved a runaway train. Please note, you may report an other safety event with 1 injury if another threshold is met. Here's some examples. An evacuation of transit property due to smoke, fumes, or noxious odors. Any fatality on transit property that is not considered a collision or suicide. 2 people thrown from their seats due to a hard brake. 3 people injured when an escalator comes to an abrupt stop. Other safety events resulting in only a single injury are reported on the S&S-20 monthly summary form. Here's a screenshot of the other safety event screen. We'll now review saving, submitting, and editing. At any point from the basic information screen on the system automatically saves your report. So if you close the report without saving or submitting from this point on, these auto-saved reports become pending reports, which are stored as a task on the task menu option. When you are ready to complete the report, click on the task menu option and you will see a listing of each task. Major event report tasks will appear with S&S-20 in the title. Just click on the task and the system will return you to the screen you were on when you close the report. Complete the report and save and submit. Or if you no longer need the report, you can choose delete instead. Save and submit options appear when you are in view form mode. If you do not see a save or submit button, click on the view form button and scroll to the bottom. Once you click on save, the report is saved. It is given an event number at the top of the report. The report stays open so you may review it. When you submit a report, the report will close the report and return you to the dashboard. Submitting the report releases it to the validation analyst for review and comment. It also notifies the analyst that a report has been created. Otherwise, we may never know one has been. If we see an unsubmitted report and it is past the due date, we will contact you to submit the report. Please note that unsubmitted reports are excluded from the event, injury, and fatality counts in the S&S-20 CEO Certification form. Analysts may return a report to you for questions or to make corrections. The system will send the last modified user 1 email for each report that is returned. After you make the correction, be sure to save and submit. Please note that if you make a change and only save and do not resubmit the report, the change will not be reflected in this SSOR. The comment box is included in all forms except the S&S-20 CEO Certification, and it's located at the bottom of the respective form. This box is used by safety analysts to ask for clarification or a change request. Each time the form is returned, it is time-stamped. Users may also respond to requests using the comment box. However, you do not need to comment that you made the change. We will see that in the form. If the analyst asks you to add a statement to the event description, please enter the statement in the description and not the comment box. When reviewing or editing your reports, it's important to learn how to move around the document. Here's a list of the available button tools, though each button may not be available on every form. One shortcut I would like to point out is the Jump To button. This button allows you to jump to a specific screen instead of using the next or back buttons. The View Form button shows the entire report for review and contains the Jump To buttons and Save and Submit buttons. When you open the report, the first screen is the Setup Summary view. This screen is the only place you can edit the date of the event. Also, if your report does not include any injuries or fatalities, this screen is the only place where you can add them. Then you would click on Next, which displays your report in view form mode. At this point, you can continue to use Next to go to each screen, or you can click on the Jump to section buttons, which are shortcuts to specific screens. This also enables the editing mode. As a reminder, Save and Submit only appear in view form mode. Always submit after editing. If you open a report and did not edit it, just click on Close. If you delete a report that was not requested by your analyst, please notify us. Analysts track the number of reports an agency enters and the total number of reports for each week. Not only do we need to know why the report was deleted, it saves us from trying to locate which report was deleted when our tracking sheets show a different number than the NTD screen. This concludes our presentation, but we will stay on if there are any outstanding questions or if there are any new questions that need to be asked. If you don't get a chance to ask your question or you prefer to ask it in a one-on-one session, please feel free to contact any of us afterwards.
So if you do have a question, just type it in the Q&A box. We'll wait a couple minutes and see if anyone posts anything.
I see that there's a little bit of discussion going on right now. Just going to jump in. Someone asked if somebody was loitering on the transit property and refused to leave without EMS coming, and they were transferred from the property if it was a reportable non-serious injury. And Dylan correctly responded that it was not a reportable injury. And then someone, or maybe two people, asked what was the rationale for that. And that's because the person isn't injured. They didn't attempt suicide. They were loitering, and unless they're injured, or we do collect, as you've heard mentioned already, some mental health type reportables. For example, a train hits a person and the operator is traumatized as a result of this collision. We do collect those operators. Attempted suicides was mentioned. Transport for a non-attempted suicide. So they said they're going to commit suicide. They didn't actually commit suicide. They're transported for a mental health evaluation. And mental health evaluations are, we're still getting into some clarity from FTA as to whether this meets a serious injury, because mental health holds are 72 hours, which is hospitalization for longer than 48 hours. But we're still waiting on the result from that one. But right now, no, this would not be considered an injury. The person was not injured. It's not a mental health issue. They're just loitering, and so it's not a reportable injury. Could they be transported requesting to go to the hospital? Okay, again, if they're just requesting to go, I want to go to the hospital. No, it's that you might transport them as a courtesy, but they're not injured, and it's not a mental health thing. So again, it would not be reportable. And again, we will have more clarity on these mental health holds and mental health evaluations. FTA is making a determination about these literally as we speak. Matter of fact, I just missed that meeting, but that's okay. But we'll get to the bottom of that, and it will be published in the policy manual when it comes out, which should be for 2021. It should be the 1st of December, and that would be posted the same place the other policy manuals are posted on the NTD website under reference materials.
Great. Oh, looks like another question might have just popped in. It's from Jonathan Guerra.
Okay.
It says, is there a monetary amount that applies to substantial damage?
No.
That was an easy answer.
That's it.
No.
There is not a monetary Well, a lot of people, because for years we had $25,000 or more.
Oh,
And for the people that have been reporting for many years, they still kind of have that, 25,000 in their head. Just take it out of your head. So substantial damage has a list of criteria, as we discussed. It has things it excludes, it has things it includes. And that's what you want to look at, is that list of criteria to determine if there was substantial damage. And the easy answer for those with the street running operations, if you're in a collision with another car and that car or a commercial vehicle, whatever it is towed away, it's substantial damage, even if that was towed because it had a flat tire. We get that one a lot because, like, well, how is that substantial? It meets the towing requirement, so it meets the substantial damage criteria.
great. Thank you. We'll just wait another minute, but we are past the hour-and-a-half mark.
Okay.
So,
well, we're available. You have
Right.
our contact for James and I here, and we're certainly available anytime by phone or email to answer your questions.
and that last slide with the information on it should be part of the handouts on the last page. It'll be a little small, but it should be legible. So if you don't have a copy of that, it should still be in the chat box. I will repaste it.
Well,
just in
even
case.
if they don't, if they go into their account in NTD, it'll list the safety analyst there.
Oh, perfect.
So you'll find whether it's, we have caseloads, so I have accounts and James has accounts. And if you don't know who's who, you can contact either one of us. But again, it is in there. If you just open up your package, you'll see our name there.
That's great.
Well, at least I think it has a name and the email address, as I recall.
That's good info. Since while we were chatting, no new questions came in, I'm going to wrap this up. So I want to thank everyone for participating. Special thank you to all the speakers and Dylan working diligently in the question and answer box there. Everyone should be getting an invitation to fill out an eval for this webinar. If you could just take a couple minutes and fill that out, we would be greatly appreciative. I guess if you guys don't have anything else to add, I wish everyone a great Thursday afternoon. And we're almost to the weekend, so hang on.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.